think we're good. Hello, everyone, and welcome. This is the second webinar of our Case Teaching in the Age of AI series. Today, we're going to be talking about deepening learning with AI as a thought partner. We're very excited to have this discussion today. My name is Laura Woodman, and I am the communication specialist at Ivey Publishing. I'll be your host today and also the discussion moderator. Now, you're probably wondering how we decided to go with this topic for this session. Well, the reason is you gave us the cue. After the first webinar of the series, we asked you through our channels on social media a short survey about what you wanted to see in the next session. One of the questions was, which areas of AI in the case classroom would you most like to explore next? Your answers were, as you can see on screen, prompts for deeper analysis and balancing AI and human judgment. So we merged those two and we created this topic that we're going to discuss today. And we really hope that you enjoy it, learn something, and just learn from this amazing panelist that we have today. Now, let's introduce you to the panelists. Let's give a big welcome to Tawnya Means. Tawnya is the founding partner and principal at Inspire Higher Ed. Tawnya is a recognized leader in higher education innovation with over 20 years advancing student success and academic strategy. She's also a very experienced educator with experiential learning and the case method at the graduate and undergraduate level. Tawnya has served in senior roles across multiple universities in the United States, where she has implemented transformative initiatives in learning technology, faculty development, and of course, AI, where she's an expert, let's say it. Tawnya is also an expert in driving measurable institutional outcomes and a fantastic person. So welcome, Tawnya. We also have with us our good friend at Ivey Publishing, David Wood. David is an operation management faculty member at Ivey Business School. He has also served as faculty director for programs like the MBA and Accelerated MBA, and also was, I have to say this, the executive director here at Ivey Publishing. David considers himself as an AI curious learner. And he's also a very passionate educator with the case method and all its possibilities. So welcome, David.
Thank you, Laura.
We're very lucky to have both of you in this discussion. So how this discussion is going to go is I'm going to be asking a series of questions to both of them. They both have the opportunity to weigh in. We're going to go back and forth a little bit, and then we'll have an open Q&A where you will be able to ask your questions to them. So at the end, we'll do about 20 minutes of that. So from right now, you can get started inputting your questions and we'll answer them live at the end. And don't worry, any questions that we don't answer, we'll be able to do that on a follow-up email that we'll send with the recording and other resources. So I think this is going to be a great session. Let's get started. Well, first, let's talk about AI as a tool versus AI as a thought partner. Tawnya, let's start with you. In your experience, what distinguishes using AI as a tool from using AI as a thought partner, and specifically in case teaching?
Laura, first of all, thank you so much for having me as part of this panel. I really enjoy our conversations that we've had previously and looking forward to this one here. So when I think about the tools that are available for education in general, there are lots of tools. And so if we specifically think about what is a usefulness of a tool helps us to accomplish something that is either easier or faster or more accomplishable than if we were to do it without the tool. And so when you think about AI as a tool, you're thinking about things like, I've got a 50-page document. I'd like to be able to summarize that and be able to use that to quickly see what was in the document and use it in some meaningful way. Or I've got a document that I need to format. And so I'm going to use this as a tool to help me with the formatting and the structure and those kinds of things. Or I need to go out and find some information and I can use AI to go and find resources, validate links and things like that. And so when you think about it as a tool, it's to accomplish a task. But thinking isn't a task, it's kind of pervasive into everything we do. And so if I think about how am I going to use AI as a thought partner, I'm trying to think about, well, if David and I were to get together and have a conversation, how would I leverage my relationship with David or the conversation to be able to accomplish something I couldn't accomplish on my own? And so I might ask him to challenge my assumptions. He might do it automatically without me even asking him to. We might play off of each other's ideas to build something better. We might look for, well, my experience says this and your experience says this. What is the place in between and how does that work? And so when we think about using AI as a thought partner, we're trying to use it in that same way. And so I can say to ChatGPT or Claude or Gemini or whatever, I can say, I have this idea. I'd like you to challenge my assumptions, point out the gaps, give me some other perspectives, help me think through this in a step-by-step manner. Tell me something that I may not have considered. Give me 15 ideas that I can build off of what I'm doing right now. So it's in no way lessening my role and in no way lessening my impact or my voice, but it's asking for me as if I had a colleague that I was working with or 20 colleagues that I was working with to get different ideas.
That is fantastic. Absolutely. David, do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, not a lot. I mean, Tanya's done a great job at differentiating between the tool and the thought leader, and I think this might be one of the most important points in this webinar. Is that so much of our focus has been on the tool? How are students using it as a means of gaining an unearned advantage with speed and efficiency, and we've lost sight of the fact that it actually can be a useful partner in learning can also be a useful partner for faculty, quite frankly, in thinking through their own teaching plans, the development of how they want to structure the case discussion. If we just ask the students or maybe teach the students how to ask better questions, as Tawnya suggested, where are the gaps in my thinking? What piece of analysis is missing? Maybe where's there a flaw in my analysis? What is an alternative perspective on this? How might my colleagues in this case scenario view this situation differently, or what might be the points of resistance, points of challenge, points of concerns from those that I work with. All of those perspectives are things that might come out in a case discussion classroom that now students have the opportunity to delve into in advance of the class or even after the class as a point of reflection. And I think that's the emphasis we need to start shifting as faculty towards is this thought partner rather than a tool.
And I'll just add one other thing that I think is really valuable from the perspective of using AI as a thought partner is it can really help us with a divergent thinking. So I could say, I'm working on this case with Reebok, but I'd love to see how it connects to Campbell's soup. Not usually something we would draw the connection between the two, but if you put in two very, very different ideas, it can actually help you to think through how those two cases are related in some way.
That's a good point. Yes. Finding those coincidences that are not evident, that are not obvious, I think. Now, let's think about something that I think educators struggle with, and it is designing the prompts. A lot of the
Mm.
times, maybe they ask two basic prompts that give them basic answers. Now, Tanya, what strategies have you found most effective for designing prompts that go deeper, that imply deeper analysis, and obviously for case discussions and case engagement?
So I think one of the first things that people do when they're first learning how to use chat tools is they're kind of almost using it as if it were Google or Siri. So they're saying, I would have normally gone into Google and I would have said, show me this, and it would pull results, and I would go through however many pages I could stand to go through before I'm like, okay, this is good enough. Or with Siri, play this song, tell me this thing. So it's more command based. Chat tools really shouldn't be used that way, especially if we think of them as not a tool, but as a thought partner. So then the opportunity to learn how to do better prompts is to think, well, how would I ask David this question? Or how would I ask Laura this question? What kinds of things could I put into my prompt to structure it in such a way to get something useful back? And so we can think about a couple of different ways. One is something like constraint-based prompting. So constraint-based prompting would be basically saying, in 250 words, tell me whatever I need to know. Or using this framework, help me to analyze this information. Or I'm talking to undergraduate students and they have this background and expertise or experience. So it's based on constraints that you would place around the prompt. So it's forcing a sort of prioritization around how it gives you information back. Because realistically, there is a huge haystack, and you're looking for a needle within that haystack that's really refined. And the only way you're going to find exactly what you're looking for is if you narrow that context window to the space around where that needle is. So giving that constraint-based prompting method is one way. I already mentioned the other one about multi-perspective. So here's a case that I'm looking at. Tell me the perspective from 10 different types of personas. And so it can give you perspectives from those different personas and help you to see different areas. And then you can draw connections between or reveal tensions between different personas. The other one that I think is extremely valuable in every situation is to be iterative. So you put in a prompt, you get a response, and then you push back on that response. And you say, well, that's not quite what I was looking for. Can you phrase it a different way? Or can you really follow this thread? And so that iterative refinement helps you to not just get a Google search back, a result back, but to really dig into the specific direction that you're wanting to go. And then basically just asking the LLM to explain to you the strategy that it's using to give you a response, because that could reveal some of the areas that you're not necessarily thinking about.
Oh, that's very interesting. I never thought about it that way. Just asking them, how did you get to that conclusion? Let me see the thought process. David, what are your strategies for designing prompts?
Well, very similar. I think the challenge here is again not using it. I like this notion of it's not a search tool. Asking for answers to case problems or to dilemmas is not really the most appropriate way. Rather than putting in here's where I'm thinking, here's how I see this problem, here's how I framed the issue. How would I determine the root cause, or where would I go to try and identify what really has been the source of this problem? Because often we tend to focus on the symptoms when we're teaching with cases, or students tend to fixate on the symptoms rather than the root causes. So helping you get to what are root causes, putting in your analysis of a particular case or dilemma, and asking it to critique it, find flaws in it. What are some implications perhaps you haven't seen? Again, asking it to perhaps critique your work, supplement things that have been missing, help summarize your conclusions. I think it's also an excellent tool for implementation. We tend not to focus a lot on implementation in our case discussions, probably because of constraints and time. So asking it to help you with developing an implementation plan. Who are the people that I need to consult with implementing this? Who are the people that are most likely to be an advocate of this? How would I get those who are opponents of this plan on board? Again, asking it for guidance and help and critique as opposed to just answers is really the focus that I would give for sure.
Great. Now, let's explore the idea of extending cases with AI, specifically talking about the case method. Uh, Tanya or David, have you ever used AI to get you to extend the experience of a case in the classroom? Maybe to have it suggest to you the use of a role play or a simulation or a what if scenario?
I'd actually like to hear David first because he's doing more teaching than I am lately, and I'd love to hear what he's doing.
Well, yeah, happy to answer it. I think one of the things that I find fascinating is actually watching my colleagues. You introduced me as a curious learner of AI. I am not an expert in AI, and in fact, I'm learning more from people like Tawnya. And last session we had Kyle McLean on here, and Kyle was talking about how he's built an AI chatbot to bring in real world current event examples that illustrate some of the principles and concepts. And so I think that's a very useful tool, asking AI to help identify, as Tanya already suggested, how would this apply in a different industry? Or even think about the timing, right? Our cases are all historic. They're all based at a point in time. asking it to think through how this may have changed in a different geography if your audience tends to be more global, or how might this change at a different point in time is always very helpful. I do like, and I haven't tried this notion of a role play, but I think it's a fascinating idea to ask AI to maybe help reframe the assignment questions you might give students if, in fact, you are representing the other side of this negotiation. I teach a case in joint ventures, and the joint venture case we take is from the position of the manufacturer of cooling systems, but the supplier of the steel is their partner. And what if we flipped it and asked it to think through how would this case be viewed from the alternative, and perhaps even give the class the chance to position it in two different angles. So I think there's a lot of ways in which we can use it. I fall into the category of just try it. And as faculty, this is, I guess, my number one advice I'd give to people is just try it. It's not too late. Someone stopped me in the hallway the other day, and they sort of admitted that they felt like the train has left the station and they didn't get on board. And I would argue it's not at all too late. Uh, Try it and see what happens. Ask your students to try it and ask them to share what they've done. There's lots of ways to sort of make this work.
I love those examples, David. I would add maybe just a couple of potential ideas. One is I like the idea of the what if scenario. So taking a case and maybe a key point in the case where there was some kind of tipping point and asking AI to generate different endings. What if that key point had gone a different direction? And so being able to say, what if the CEO had done this instead of that? Or what if the key marketing person had gone this direction instead of that direction? Or what if the US economy had done this instead of that? And so being able to do some of those what if scenarios, I think, is a really fascinating way of thinking about how AI could take a single case and branch it in different ways. Along the same lines, thinking about it from a personalization from the individual student's perspective. So you've got students who, especially in graduate and executive ed programs, where they're coming from vastly different environments where they're actually in roles that are doing some of these things we're talking about in cases. And if you could say, well, let's take this case and let's adjust it to your environment or your industry or your interests, and seeing how that plays out differently. And I also like the idea of maybe I used to teach a case where it was around the shipping industry and some of the things that were happening with the shipping industry. Wouldn't it be fascinating to take that same case and say, replicate it in, early American history with trains and how it would be different, how would it look differently, and what would be the key players and how would that play out? So it could still be in a historical context, but it could be, a different kind of activity for people to think through.
Yeah,
And then the
sure.
last one that I would suggest is that there's a lot of opportunity for follow-up after the case. So you have a class discussion, whether that's online or in person, and you're really talking through kind of the things that you're highlighting in the case and the learning and the all of those pieces. And if you're able to capture that, then giving the opportunity for students to go and think through what that would look like if they were to make recommendations after the case. And so you've already completed the case discussion, and now where do we take it? You could easily design a chatbot that could help them think through the things that you talked about in class as a follow-up activity. So it's taking that reflection to the next level and allowing them to do it kind of on their own terms as opposed to in the moment in the class.
And
And
I love
speaking
that
about,
idea.
oh, go ahead,
I was
David.
gonna say, I love the idea of the reflection because I think we ignore this far too often in our teaching is asking students to use it as a reflection. Either how does this apply to my industry, my geography, what might happen next? Even that what if, like we make a decision, what's the competitor likely to do, right? You get into game theory and asking it to suggest perhaps a reaction to the competitor, and then leaving that with students to say, okay, reflect on this. Now the competitor has done this. What do we do? And so there's a lot we can do, as Tanya mentioned, to think about extending that into reflection space for sure.
I was going to say, speaking about reflection, let's move on to the next topic that we identified as part of the survey, which is how do we balance AI and human judgment in the
Mm.
classroom? How do you make sure that AI enhances, rather than replaces, the judgment that makes the case method so unique? David, let's start with you.
Well, thank you. I'm not convinced that AI is really going to replace judgment, especially in the space that we live in the world of ambiguity and uncertainty. Certainly, it can help us with our analysis. It can be, as we talked about, this thought partner. Uh, my experience with this, and this semester has been quite different. I've been asking my students to use ChatGPT to help with their analysis, to support their analysis in solving these cases, to help them refine their thinking and share the threads. And what I've found fascinating is, large language models are really good at regurgitating back what they've already heard. They aren't necessarily great at thinking beyond the creative elements and filling in those gaps of ambiguity and uncertainty. And that's, I think, where judgment comes in. So helping students understand the limitations of that, helping students understand how it can help you if you ask the right questions, the right prompts, as Tawnya already mentioned, if you give the students the guidance to ask the right questions, then it can certainly help test our thinking, but I don't know that it necessarily replaces it, at least maybe not yet. Uh, and if, I guess I'd advocate to faculty, if in fact that's not the case, if you're teaching a case that is simply uh, illustrative example of how to apply a concept, which can be very useful, and AI can answer that question at an A or A plus level, then perhaps we need to start thinking about asking different questions. Perhaps we need to think about having different cases. Perhaps we need to start thinking about maybe delving more into what are the implications? How might this change in a different environment? What might be the limitations to that? And maybe we need to move quicker to those more difficult cases where we start challenging students in that space of uncertainty rather than the I think the land in which we're just trying to illustrate concepts.
David, I love that idea, and it actually makes me think of kind of a pre-class, class, post-class kind of theme, where pre-class, you're asking them to take the case, put it into an LLM, get a response. They come into class and they recognize some of the things you're talking about, where, oh, there's a lot of generic responses here, or no, nothing's really being pointed out different. And there's that pushback in the class where you're getting into, okay, what's a deeper question? How can we how can we dig under this even more to be able to bring about more thought processes through that classroom experience? And then you follow up with the reflection kind of activity where how did you what was the comparison between what you did pre-class and post, during class, and how is that different? And where do you see your voice coming through versus the voice that you gathered from your pre-work? Because I think what happens with judgment is in some cases when we're teaching, students have the capability for judgment because they have background and experience. And in other cases, they don't. So, and they can maybe make a stretch to scaffold what they're doing in the class based on something that they know, but they may not actually have the experience to be able to tie to it. In most cases, the faculty who are leading do have that expertise and experience, whether it's through research or through industry experience or whatever. And so their ability to curate information and contextualize information is still going to be very vital. We're not going to find a place where we don't need those kinds of experts who have that experience and background. But the teaching moments come from moments of friction, from ambiguity, from where there's nuance that the LLMs are missing. And so that's where that deeper learning is going to happen because we're able to bring the expertise of the instructor and the experience or scaffolding of the students and even the information that's collected and leveraged from the LLM to be able to bring it all together to be able to articulate those deeper moments and to actually see growth or change, which is what learning is.
Yeah, and I couldn't agree more. I think we have to start to remember, or maybe just remember, period, is that it is the struggle sometimes that is more important, and having students struggle with this, having them uh, really try and solve these problems that are complex. Judgment or wisdom, if you want to call it that, is the combination of knowledge and experience. And knowledge is becoming easier and easier to acquire, but that experience is harder and harder. And if we don't teach students the constraints and limitations of these LLMs and how they need to go beyond it, if we don't really give them that experience and exposure, they're not going to quite get that struggle. They need to live through that struggle. So I've even taken to a point where we've posted responses from the LLMs prior to class, asked students to read through it and critique it. And I found those discussions tended to be much better because students came in understanding that was kind of the baseline. And it wasn't until they had to figure out what was wrong with it, what the limitations were. Actually, my students were much harder on that. They all started grading the LLM. How good was ChatGPT or Gemini at solving these problems? And they were much harder graders than I expected. But that experience encouraged me to just keep going with regard to pushing the students beyond what the LLM could do.
And I think the key piece here is transparency. So both from the student's perspective and from the faculty's perspective, we need to have transparency about the value of these tools, the mechanisms for how to get what we want out of these tools, and the usability of their responses and the evaluation and thought process and judgment that goes around which pieces of this do you use and which pieces of this are not relevant, and how does that fit with everything that we're talking about, because we need to have those conversations with our students. We can't just, you know, ignore the fact that this is now integrated into everything that is happening in the world. You do a Google search and the first results are AI results. You use an editing tool and AI is in there. I mean, AI is everywhere, and so we need to have real conversations about what does this mean and how is this influencing and impacting what we're doing in the world.
That is absolutely true. AI is everywhere. It's hard to ignore. We shouldn't ignore it. We should embrace it and figure it out. Let's talk about something that you touched a little bit, Tanya, earlier, which is how to use AI for adapting cases for diverse learners. How do you think AI and if you have any prompt examples, AI can help instructors adjust the same case for students with different backgrounds, as you mentioned earlier, and different learning needs?
Sure. Well, there are a lot of ways in which AI can influence diverse learners. We can think about it from an accessibility perspective. So people need different formats, whether that's an audio description in a video or simplified language or a different language or visual aids that go with that particular piece of content. And so for accessibility purposes, we can do a lot to be able to make that content more accessible to more learners, whether that's accommodations for disabilities or other preferences for how people learn, or just around the idea of universal design for learning and making sure that it's good quality for any learner. We can also use AI to help with the cultural context of a case. And so if it's set in a particular culture, we can ask for other examples of different, I think, David, you mentioned about different geographies or things like that. So local contexts or examples or norms for different environments. We can definitely use it for scaffolding. So thinking about some learners come in with prior knowledge that is very valuable to helping them understand the case, and others don't. And so helping them to get up to speed about the prerequisite kind of explainers of what these concepts are or what we're talking about. So different kinds of backgrounds, but not watering down the case discussion itself. So before you come to class, get up to speed on these contexts and terms and phrases and things like that. So one of the things that I think is really valuable here is being able to, as an individual instructor, and I have 60 students in my class, I can't give each one of them that personalized attention to be able to say, I know you need this for the case. I need, and doing that is just, it's a recipe for disaster because an individual instructor doesn't have that much bandwidth to be able to do it. But AI does, and it's not tired. It doesn't get tired or frustrated or disappointed or any of those kinds of things. And so being able to adapt the case for those different contexts and different learners can help both the faculty member to have a reasonable workload, but the students themselves to have a better learning experience.
David, what are your thoughts on accessibility using AI?
Yeah, I'm fascinated to listen to Tanya's experience. That she's worked in this field a lot longer than I have. I have not tried this yet, and I think it's an opportunity. The geography and the industry, I think, is fair, but getting into accessibility, I think, is a fascinating idea. I have not really done much work in yet.
Well, I have a final question for both of you. If you were to give advice to faculty starting with AI, as you said, David, it's not too late. And this is a technology that keeps evolving. The train has not left the station. You're fine. It's time. You're on time. So based on your experiences so far, what practical advice would you give them?
David, I want you to go first here.
You want me to go first? Okay. Well, I mean, my answer is always just try it. And we had a faculty meeting a week or two ago, and I suggested that maybe the first step is for you to try putting your assignment into at that time we were using ChatGPT, we're using a Nebula One now and some other tools, but just try putting your assignment in. And of course, one faculty confessed that they had done this, and it gave them, a really good answer, probably a 90% answer. And I suggested, well, then maybe it's time to change the assignment. They didn't like that answer, but just try it. See what it can do. Understand what it can't do. Understand where that we talked about judgment already, but understand where the gap is in what AI can do, and focus on that's maybe where you should be uh, devoting your efforts to teaching and learning and helping your students understand that as well. The other piece of advice I would give is find a space and time for your students to do it. And in fact, not just encourage it, but require it. I actually learned this from Tawnya. This was years ago, in fact, when this first started. And just asking your students to use it and share what they've done, share what they learned, share where they thought the limitations were, what the challenges were. This year, I've asked students in 4 of the papers they had to write where they had to share the thread. And I have anecdotal evidence only at this point. I haven't really delved into it in great detail, although I think Tawnya, I mentioned this and suggested maybe I could use ChatGPT to help me with this. But it is to me fascinating that the quality of the prompts and the follow-up prompts is leading to better thoughts and better papers. And I'm actually quite happy with that. I'm happy that students are learning how to use the the tool, and in this case, I think it is a sort of a tool, but it is helping them with their development and their learning. And the more they use it, the more they're showing the potential of it. The more I'm getting comfortable with the fact that it can also help us in the classroom. So I would just say, just try it.
I love that. I often talk about how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. Start small. Don't try and boil the ocean. Don't try and accomplish everything. Don't throw out everything that's in your course and try to start over again. Pick something small and really focus on that one thing. So if you're only if you only have the energy to do one thing, start with pre-case class or pre-class case questions. So sending the students the questions ahead of time and having them think through it with AI. Just that one thing will really impact what you actually do in the classroom. And so don't try and overhaul everything all at once. That'll just be a recipe for disaster. I really like the idea of documenting what works. And so even if you just have a notepad and you're kind of like, well, that was terrible, or that worked really well, or this prompt didn't give me quite what I wanted, but this prompt after I iterated through did. And so kind of like building your own library of the things that work and keeping a record of that can be really helpful to reflect back on. David, you and I have talked a little bit about this idea, but just iterating through with your students. You mentioned that as one of the things, but asking them, how do you feel like this is working for you? Is it helping your learning? Do you feel like you're offloading some of your cognitive tasks to an outside entity? Do you feel like you're maintaining your voice? And if they're, not only will that be an insightful conversation for them to be a part of, but it will help you to recognize the things that are more successful versus less successful. I think there's 3 things you could kind of try right up front that would be meaningful. One is just help generate discussion questions. I mean, especially if you're used to the case teaching method, you kind of have a method of how you go through and build case questions, or every case usually has a teaching note that has some case questions, but you could build alternative questions and see how those resonate with you. Building stakeholder profiles that you can then leverage in your cases. Like what does that look like? Who are the audiences that you're working with? And then trying to build some what if scenarios. I think those are a lot of fun. You could do a lot with those. The other thing that I think is really, really important, and this kind of goes along the idea of not trying to boil the ocean or do everything at once, is I try to think of it as kind of an 85-15 principle. 85% of what you are teaching should be things that are familiar to the students. They're comfortable for the students because they're really scaffolding things that they already know. And then only about 15% should be new things that you're trying to get them to understand or accept. If you're trying to do more and more and more because AI helps you to generate more content, you're just going to overwhelm the students. The cognitive load is going to be too much, and they're not going to be able to manage it. They're not going to be able to learn well. But if you're trying to reduce the amount of new information and then really hit that new information deeply, then that is going to build for a much better learning experience. And in that case, in that way, you can actually take, here's what I am teaching, help me refine it to the core principles. Help me articulate what's really important to get out of this content for the students. And it will help you to kind of pull apart the things that are more important to focus on and more new information and less of the kind of just adding on and adding on and adding on.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Tawnya. Thank you so much, David. That was amazing. I think you've given our audience great practical advice, advice that you follow yourselves that will be very, very helpful for their classes right now, things that they can implement right now after this session. Absolutely. Now let's start with the Q&A. I know a lot of people wait for this part of the session with a lot of excitement. We have already some questions. And I'm just going to shoot the questions, and any of you can answer as you see fit. So lots of interesting questions about just how educators have some doubts in the classroom. The first one is how to get the students to use Gen AI more critically. And we touched on this, but I'm sure there's more to say.
I would say that my instruction to my students would be don't ever accept anything at face value. Every response you get, question it, push back on it, find an angle because you have one. I mean, it sounds good. And so you're like, that's good enough. But don't do that. Like, don't let that be your behavior, your typical behavior. Push back on some element of it. And even if it's just one aspect of it, it still gets your brain engaged with what's coming out of the LLM.
Yeah, I used to start my class with students posting, or sorry, students not posting, students sharing their decision to the case. Now I have been experimenting with this where I'm posting the decision that in this case ChatGPT 5 had come up with, but it could be any LLM. And then we start the discussion with, all right, what did you like about this? What did you not like about it? Where are the issues? Where are the deficiencies? Where are the challenges? What didn't just sit well with you? And the the teaching of that case has changed now because we tend to focus on where the gaps are. But I want the students to identify those first. And so in some ways, it's almost like the students are creating the agenda for the class. Where are the problems with this answer? Where are the gaps? As Tawnya said, don't take it at face value. Let's identify where those issues are. Let's make a list of those. Let's dive into those and discuss it. And then at the end of the class, you come back and say, all right, how did we do versus the LLM? And inevitably, the students are quite pleased that there's a lot more work to do if they just knew the questions to ask. And that's part of our job is to teach them, how do you ask better questions? How do you think about different issues? So again, just try it and help guide that discussion. Don't let students do it on their own. They won't figure it out by themselves.
That's a good point. This is a sort of a similar question, but maybe there's something to it that we can add. What about how to use AI to get those fringe or outlier ideas as opposed to just mainstream ideas, since often those are the ones that point to newer research or something as opposed to something that was researched 100 years ago.
One of the things that I think is really valuable is in terms of creativity is more ideas rather than less. If you ask an average person, who may or may not think that they're very creative, how many ideas do you think it will take for you to come up with something new or innovative? And they'll probably say something like 10 to 20 ideas, whatever. it actually takes a lot more than that to come up with something innovative. And so if I ask an LM, ChatGPT, Claude, Gemini, whatever, if I say, give me 100 ideas for this, that is more than I'm going to think of on my own, for one thing. But I
Mhm.
can then say, of those 100 ideas, give me the top five that are so different. And so it's going to pull out some that are really different. And then I can say, now tell me what those two, take two of those five and merge them into something new. That's not something we're used to doing as humans. We think we're creative, but most of the time we're not that creative. And so this can give us more ideas to work with and pull in some of those outlier ideas. Even thinking about it from the perspective of, using a tool like Perplexity or Google, what's the other one that I'm thinking of? It's Scholar something. It's not Google Scholar, but where you're looking for research and you're saying, give me as many ideas as you can find on this rather than the top cited ones. And so what you're doing is you're trying to pull in research from avenues that you wouldn't necessarily look at in the first place. And so that can give you more ideas to work with than you would have had on your own.
Great tip. That's a great tip. Absolutely. And I think that that is good for the next question that we have also. What adjustments have you made to the assessment process when students use AI when working with cases?
I'd
David?
love to hear what David's doing with this.
Yeah,
Yeah,
so
David.
I'm repeating myself. The first advice I would give faculty is run your assignment through an LLM and look at how it does. Be critical of how it's doing. If it is giving you an above average answer, it's time for you to change your assessment. The notion that students won't use it if we tell them they're forbidden is, I think, all you're doing is punishing the good students, because the bad students will ignore you and use it, and you'll never know, uh, unless they're using it really poorly, in which case it won't matter. Instead, try and find a way of amending or managing your assignments so that the answers that you're getting from the LLMs are not actually all that good. Focus on there needs to be enough room between the floor. The floor is now what an LLM can do. And if there's not room between that floor and a plus paper for students to shine and to demonstrate competency and application, then you've got to amend your assignments. And so for me, it has largely been going through and finding cases that are more challenging. Often, I think the key has been looking at that opening paragraph and looking at that dilemma. And is that dilemma presented in the case, quite frankly, just a symptom of a deeper rooted issue? The LLMs are not great at deciphering root cause from symptoms. And so if we can give students the challenge of what is, quite frankly, a more difficult case that presents in a way that the real issue, the real root cause of the issue is less identifiable, and or where the quantitative and qualitative reasoning are in contrast with each other, those are the cases where I think students can shine. And so it's about finding better material and just thinking LLM is the floor. You've got to give students something that they can build on that's better than that.
And one thing I would add to this isn't necessarily just specific to case teaching, but thinking about the assessments that we're doing now versus what's possible with an LLM. So an example of this would be, and not in a case teaching example, but just in a regular teaching example, I do a quiz or an essay. Those are so easy to put into a ChatGPT and get a response that's good enough, like David said. But if I said, well, if I, as an individual instructor, wanted to assess one student, what would I do? Well, I wouldn't give them a quiz or ask them to write a paper. I'd talk to them. And so in talking to them, I would be able to articulate what I wanted to know, and they would be able to give me evidence that they either know it or not, or don't know it. And so if we think about the opportunity for a chatbot to be able to have a conversation based on guidance that I put in, these are the kinds of questions I want to explore. The student has a conversation either through voice, if it's using like a ChatGPT voice or something like that, or through typing using a chatbot that way. And then I get the transcript. I can very easily tell from the transcript what the student knows and doesn't know. And if I wanted to do that across all of my students, say I have 45 students, I don't have to read through every one of those conversations. I could skim through them, I could spot check them, I could do whatever. But then, just like I was mentioning to David, I could take all of those chat threads throw them into an LLM and say, give me insights. And from those insights, it'd be aggregated across all of those students to be able to see, well, in general, students are getting this aspect, and in general, they're not getting this aspect. And I know what to then use that assessment for to better the teaching experience, to be able to say, let me expand on this in class because they really just didn't get it, or let me highlight some of the things that people pulled out that maybe we didn't talk about in class. And so using it in that way to rethink, well, what am I actually trying to accomplish with this assessment? I'm not trying to just get them to check a box. That's easy. I'm trying to see that they have growth, to see that they've actually changed something about their thought process. And this is a way to articulate that.
We have an interesting question here about the pros and cons about allowing students to use AI during the classroom, as opposed to just during the preparation stage of a case. What do you think about that?
Well, I mean, to date, I've used it as, or I've asked students to use it as a tool to help them prep, or help them reflect afterwards. I've
Mhm.
encouraged them to think about uh, using it as a thought partner, putting your reflections in after class. It's really good at giving you feedback, synthesizing, organizing those reflections. In the large classroom discussions or the live classroom discussion, we've gone back to no laptops in the classroom.
Mhm.
Largely because I want students to live in the moment. I don't want them to be fixated on typing, reading, or turning on the audio features on their laptops. So we have not done that. Now, I know some of my colleagues, though, have taken control of that. So again, students have no laptops, faculty does. Faculty says, well, let's stop and let's see what the LLM can give us insights on, and they will type in the prompt or the piece of analysis and ask for flaws. So there's nothing wrong with that. I don't know that I just haven't done it to this point. I see it really as a useful tool in the individual prep and the after class reflection, but the large group I still want to keep really constrained to the living in that moment.
I see that there are two potential ways that this could be done, and I'm going to say live, not because that allows for the flexibility of live in person or live synchronously online. Um, One is to be able to capture the conversation. So it's not AI is in any way influencing what's happening, but it's just capturing either through dictation or through capturing a transcript. If you're on like a breakout group and a breakout room and you've got the transcript running and being able to capture through AI kind of listening in. That allows you as the instructor to get insights in rooms that you wouldn't necessarily be able to be in because you can't be in all places at one time. So I think AI could be leveraged really well for capturing what's happening and then being able to run analytics on what happens afterwards. There's a couple of platforms that are really good at that. The second one would be to ask for AI to be a partner in a team. And so, for example, you might have a team having a conversation, you have them take on different roles to participate, whether it's a role play or just a discussion. And then you have AI serving as maybe one of those roles that's missing. And so, I did a really interesting panel a couple of weeks ago where I had live people who were answering questions from different perspectives. And then I had an AI conversational agent on the phone. And it was listening in to our conversation. And then I would ask the AI for their perspective. And it was really kind of interesting to see it kind of summarized what the others were talking about, but then brought in the perspective as an LLM, I think this. And so I think that's an interesting way of thinking about how to use it live to give a different perspective if you maybe want to see, maybe you to say, as the LLM, you are this particular cultural persona, or you are this particular role persona. And that can bring in a different perspective that the live people aren't necessarily bringing.
Now, we mentioned about using it live. What about using AI? This is another question. In 100% asynchronous online environment. Any thoughts on that? Any tips on that?
So I mentioned already about having it be like the bot that you have the conversation with. I think that's one way. I know that there's also a platform that similar to being able to do the live just listening in, that you can have a conversation with a particular bot of a sort and be able to like have that conversation in an asynchronous format if you can't have any synchronous conversation. So I do think that there are ways that you can do it.
Yeah, I would agree. I think this is something I have not done, but I am curious about. We're experimenting with it. We've built our own custom bot to try and do some of this, and I think it is again, it's not this notion of how do we prevent it, but how do we embrace it? How do we use a chat bot as a member of their learning team or as a guided facilitator? Because most asynchronous case teaching is done through discussion forums. And
Mhm.
so why not include AI as a member of that discussion forum or a facilitator in that discussion forum? And so I know there's lots of different organizations building kind of custom bots to help guide those questions or to help provide counterfactuals, alternative views to try and push the conversation in different directions. I think those are really interesting. We have done some experimentation with that and have had some interesting results.
Now that you mentioned counterfactuals, somebody's asking, how do you manage copyright issues when reframing case-related questions or created counterfactuals in the case narrative? David, any thoughts?
Well, this is I think, a real challenge for intellectual property rights and how do we manage that? I know that many institutions, Ivey as well, has been investing a lot of time and money into creating unique incidents of our LLMs that protect our faculty and the intellectual property of our faculty. So we've just signed a new contract with Nebula One, which gives us that platform to sort of ring fence all of our content, restricts that content from being used in the training mode outside of our environment, gives students access to it. The key to this is we can't just bury our head in the sand and say thou shalt not do it. It will never happen. And hope it doesn't because it already has. Someone's already done it. How do we just create environments where we can protect the intellectual property within our academic institutions? And so a lot of schools, I think, are moving in this direction quickly for good reasons.
Very good. We have time for like two more questions if you're up to for it. Lots of questions about assignments. You already touched on that. Lots of questions about assessments that you already touched on. Um, let's see what else we have here. Somebody's asking, has any empirical research has been done to assess whether or not ChatGPT leads to greater student learning? For example, the ability to use higher order thinking. That's interesting. Tanya?
David, I think you were talking about putting together a study based on your anecdotal evidence. I think that that's a really good place to explore because these models are so new, and each time a model comes out, it behaves differently. It's very difficult to do research. If you follow Ethan Mollick, he has a lot of things that he's put out about research around how these tools are being used and how they affect learning, but it's the models are constantly changing. And so it's really difficult to be able to, I mean, even within a single semester, if you were to say, well, I'm going to evaluate this in this semester with these students, that model may change 3 times within the semester. And so, and each time the model comes out, it has a different capabilities, different strengths, and even sometimes the model during its current uh, span of life may degrade or increase depending on the capabilities of the platform itself or the company and what they're doing. So I think it's a very difficult area to do research right now because of so much change and volatility in the actual tools themselves. And we also see some evidence that's coming out that says things like it was kind of like your brain on ChatGPT talk that went out, which if you actually read the study, it's very interesting and has some really cool stuff in it that could be expanded greatly with research. But I think the talking point was you're going to ruin your brain. That's not really what's happening. And so I do think this is a place that's very ripe for strong research, but challenging to research at this time.
Yeah, but I know we've done 3 experiments now at Ivy. Now these have been small scale. I'm not sure that they're robust enough for publication, but they're a good place to start in framing future research. But we've done 3 to date, looking at the use of AI and other forms of case learning and case teaching. And the results have been, I would say, encouraging. They've identified some challenges. They certainly have, there's been no evidence it's degraded students' learning, and some, I would say, small evidence that suggests it actually has enhanced the quality of the discussion in the classroom. Again, largely because what's happening is students are getting through some of, I'll call them the more mechanical elements of the case analysis quicker. And the conversation shifts more to that higher order thinking around, oh, what are the implications? How would I develop solutions to this? How would I synthesize a model that would help me think through this kind of problem in the future? Those are the things that are happening in the case discussion more as a result of them being better prepared. Now, did they take shortcuts to get to that better preparation? I would say the data on, because we measure quality of contribution, and if you think that's a robust measure, then the quality of the contribution of the students who've used AI actually has improved. So some evidence, but nothing that I would argue is worth publishing yet at this point.
Good points. David, final thoughts. We're running out of time,
Yeah,
unfortunately. So
I'll make it brief. I'm, as I said, I'm curious about what can be done. I'm by no means an expert, and I imagine a lot of people on this call are curious as well, or you wouldn't be here. I would encourage you to try it. Ask your colleagues what they're doing. Ask the students what they're doing. Uh, just try it and see what happens. It will at least give you exposure to what's possible and hopefully get you to think differently about how you might develop better teaching materials and better teaching plans.
thank you so much, David. Tawnya, final thoughts.
I can't do more than echo what David just said. I think that the more experience you actually have with hands-on, you can watch people, you can hear things, you can read things, you can listen to things, but until you actually get your hands into the tool and try it and fail and be okay with the failure and then try it again and try it differently and iterate, you're not going to gain the knowledge or expertise that you need to be able to use it effectively. And the same thing goes for the students. Until you have them actually trying and trying and trying and experiencing that failure and recognizing that it's messy and running up against hallucinations and running up against failures on the part of the tools, you're not going to have them really recognize the value of their own input, their own voice, and their own expertise being developed. And so just try it and have your students try it and stop trying to clamp down and pretend like it doesn't exist because it does.
Absolutely. That's the biggest lesson we've learned today. Do not ignore it, embrace it, and try. Absolutely. Thank you so much, Tanya. Thank you so much, David. And thanks to everybody that joined this morning, afternoon, or evening, depending on where you're located. We are very happy that you were here. This recording will be sent to you in a follow-up email in the next couple of days, as well as some resources that we have available to you, including some learning materials on the topic of AI, in case you want to try some of these methods and techniques with cases that actually that also speak about AI in business. So please just visit our website if you need any information at all. And you can follow Tanya and David on social media. They're very active over there. So you can also continue the conversation there, asking any questions that you may have on this topic. And we have another webinar on this same series coming up soon, so stay tuned for details. Follow us on social media as well to learn more. Thank you so much, and we hope you have a great rest of your day.
Great. Thank
Thank
you.
you. Bye-bye.